This segment of the news has been brought to you by Sun Oil Limited.
Welcome back. In 2020, the Simonette Group of companies made a proposal to the government for an aggregate or limestone mining operation on 5,200 acres of North Andros. The proposal met stiff opposition from environmentalists, ordinary Bahamians, and at the time, the official opposition, the Progressive Liberal Party. Now, at a recent PLP town hall meeting on North Andros, the proposal once again took center stage as PLP cabinet ministers were pressed for answers on the government's position. Drino Saunders has more in this report.
Despite initial fierce pushback in 2020, the Bahamas Materials Company is moving forward with a proposal for a mining operation by the Simonette Group, led by Chief Executive Officer Cameron Simonette, to mine aggregate or limestone on North Andros in an area that combines 200 acres of private land and 5,000 acres of Crown land. Although not on the agenda, the mining proposal became the center of discussion during a community meeting at the Nicholstown High School on Saturday, with approximately 250 people in attendance. A number of Progressive Liberal Party cabinet ministers, including the Minister of Foreign Affairs Fred Mitchell, attended that meeting. In a voice message on Monday regarding the meeting, Mr. Mitchell explained why he and other ministers could not make definitive statements regarding the mining proposal. Instead, he reverted to policy statements made in early 2020 when the PLP was still the official opposition.
The proposal is similar to one in Grand Bahama where aggregate is mined and shipped out of the country. A group of young men sought to present the case that this proposal will provide $53 million in monies over 10 years for employment and 150 jobs. The difficulty is that because the proposal is before the government, none of us would comment on any of the proposals and its disposition. The problem is this: the public policy involves what the PLP's position is. One is that Morgan's Bluff, the port in North Andros, is to remain in public hands. It is not to become a private port.
Mr. Mitchell then spoke about the value of carbon credits as it relates to natural resources. He went so far as to suggest that the natural resources on and around Andros may be more beneficial to the Bahamas if they remain untouched.
Secondly, the environmental international policies these days have now something called carbon credits. Right now, for example, the Minister of Works, Alfred Sayers, is in Gabon, meeting with the government there, that's in West Africa, on how the Bahamas can enter the carbon credit market, which has the potential to monetize hundreds of millions of dollars for the Bahamas. It may be, therefore, that it is better to leave our forests and leave the sand, aggregate, and aragonite in the land, in the ground, and in the sea. Norway, for example, pays Guyana not to cut down its forests.
Mr. Mitchell says, although there has been no decision made on the proposal to date, this present generation of Bahamians has a major decision to make in terms of the natural resources.
No comment was made about the project in North Andros because the decision is still outstanding. But it raises the question of whether the present generation has a responsibility to protect our heritage today or to forget about tomorrow and just cash in today. The answer is for the government and the people of the Bahamas ultimately decide.
The proposal by the Simonette Group was first presented to the Minnis-led cabinet. It was reportedly presented to the Davis administration in January of this year for a decision of approval or denial. Meanwhile, North Andros Chamber of Commerce President Darren Bethel advises residents to make informed and not emotional decisions by gathering all of the facts on the pros and cons of the proposed mining operation. Drino Saunders, JCN News.
The Minister of Foreign Affairs Fred Mitchell on Wednesday responded to a story in a local daily from Tuesday titled "Give Us the Facts" on North Andros meeting. The story was based on a town meeting in Nicholstown, Andros on Saturday, where the subject of the proposal by the Simonette Group of companies to mine limestone on over 5,000 acres of Crown land on Andros became the center of attention, even though it was not on the agenda. Andros residents for and against the project wanted answers from cabinet ministers in attendance. However, in a statement on Monday, Mr. Mitchell said cabinet ministers could not comment on the proposal because it is still up for review. Today, he takes issue with the local daily's paper, accusing them of printing one side of the story regarding the Andros meeting, and he had this to say on Wednesday.
I reported on this meeting 2 days ago. I follow up in the voice note today because it is clear now that given the latest report in the Tribune about the meeting, that there is a concerted attempt to inflame passions over this matter. First, the ministers who traveled there made no comment about the proposal of a company who wants to mine aggregate or quarry from North Andros and export it to the United States. The report in the press indicated that there was a call for the facts, so that an informed decision can be made. We, the PLP, agree, and one of those facts is to print the facts about the meeting, the facts. How it could be said that 75% of those at the meeting supported the proposal when the proposal was not before the meeting is a magic trick worthy only of Neil Hartnell and the Tribune, particularly when no obvious recorded attempt in this case was made by the press, the Tribune, to hear the other side, particularly since the article called public officials names, but none of them, insofar as I can tell, tried to contact any one of us who was at that meeting to verify our side of the story.
Mr. Mitchell described the article as being tendentious or seeming to promote the proposal by the Seminole Group of companies. The PLP opposed the proposal while in opposition in 2020. The Seminole Group presented the proposal to the Davis administration in January for consideration. The project proposes to generate $53 million over 10 years and 150 jobs. Mr. Mitchell is not impressed by those projections and gave us this example as to why.
So let's average that out. Over 10 years, that makes $5.3 million in the North Andros economy for each of those 10 years. Now, I'm not defending the American-based Ortec, but in 1 year, Ortec pays the Bahamas government $12 million just to lease the land. And most of the people in the country think that is inadequate. So just imagine $5.3 million for each year over 10 years in North Andros. What do you think about that? The obvious question is that enough? If you look at the expenditure, for example, on roads alone by the Bahamas government, the investment of the Bahamas government in North Andros, it's close to $100 million in expenditure.
Mr. Mitchell reminded that the town meeting was not about the mining proposal, but focused mostly on the education system on Andros and getting students back to school. Meanwhile, the proposal for the mining operation was presented to the government in January. Minister of Health and Wellness Dr. Michael Darville says that progress is moving swiftly for a new hospital to be built on New Providence and Grand Bahama. On the campaign trail, the Progressive Liberal Party outlined in the party's Blueprint for Change plan this commitment. Just before the weekly cabinet meeting, Dr. Darville spoke to how it's going for that project.
We made a commitment to the residents of Grand Bahama that we should be in a position to put the shovel in the ground very soon.
Dr. Darville notes that details associated with the hospitals, the Ministry of Health is still waiting for health planners, architects, and engineers to do the final work for a total price tag. When asked how long the project on Grand Bahama will take, Dr. Darville says this.
It's very difficult to say, and I don't want to give a set date. And then it turns out that it is a bit longer than we anticipate. But we all know projects. You have a completion time, and then a year later, the project is still ongoing. But we intend to move very quickly. We realize that we have weather systems that potentially can affect Grand Bahama. And we realize the urgent need to ensure that the deficiencies that currently exist at Duran, we're able to supplement them as soon as possible.
Dr. Darville says he hopes to get the project on Grand Bahama kicked off before the end of the year. However, he could not say when ground would be broken in New Providence for the new hospital. Within the last several weeks, a number of homicides that have occurred in the capital are alleged to be gang-related. Well, yesterday, during the Youth Empowerment Forum, Inspector Jermaine Toot from the Central Intelligence Bureau of the Royal Bahamas Police Force provided a comprehensive precedent on the gang culture in the country. The inspector pointed out that right now the country is seeing its third generation of gang activity backdating to the mid-1980s with syndicate gangs. He gives a brief look into what gangs are like in the country.
Initially we started with the One Order gang, the Mod 8 gang, and there was another gang, the Fire and Theft gang. Because of infighting and leaders being killed, that gang almost don't exist anymore. And like I mentioned, the early 2000s, the One Order gang came about. So now, let's fast forward to now. That was the big gang. But now they've split up into so many different denominations. You have Dirty South. You have Tiger Nation. You have Crack Nation. You have Grove What Niggas. And you have a faction of the old One Order gang in Torxel called Outlaws. So this is the problem what we have in the day. This used to be one big gang, and it's split into all these different entities, and they are all warring with each other right now.
Also, Inspector Toot explained what the penal code says about gangs and organized crime.
A person who is a member of an unlawful gang or participates in or contributes to the activities of an unlawful gang where any or all of the members of the unlawful gang engage in or have within the preceding 3 years. Remember that, within the preceding 3 years, engage in the commission of indictable offenses under this code. And indictable offenses are offenses such as murder, armed robbery, firearm possession, and so forth.
Meantime, the inspector noted that schools have become a breeding ground for gang recruitment. He says that the Commissioner of Police is actively engaged in dismantling gang activities within the country. Attorney General Senator Ryan Pinder telling members of the media today that the government is doing what it can to protect high-risk non-government organizations against money laundering and terrorist attacks whose money is placed internationally. His comments follow the opening of the third nonprofit organization orientation training program this morning.
We have, as I said, about 1,047 not-for-profits in the Bahamas. But the approach of a regulator and the approach in anti-money laundering is to be risk-based, which means that you want to monitor and supervise those who are more high risk and vulnerable to terrorist financing and money laundering, and those who are lower risk, you want a light touch regulatory approach on them.
The AG says that the government's approach during these sessions are to invite NGOs who the government have already risk assessed as being more vulnerable to terrorist financing and money laundering, and they are not concerned about those who are low risk.
It's very important that from a money laundering point of view, the Bahamas achieves excellence in all ratings. Like I mentioned in the speech earlier, it affects every Bahamian, because we need to be regarded as a low-risk jurisdiction. All of this boils down to risk. And if we're non-compliant in certain sectors, the banking institutions would deem us, and even the European Union and other multilateral institutions, as a higher risk jurisdiction. And that affects all of our day-to-day banking. As I mentioned, it takes 30, 60 days to open a bank account in the Bahamas. In Europe, it takes 30 to 60 minutes. Well, that's because we're viewed differently. Rightfully or wrongly, we are viewed differently from a risk point of view.
Senator Pinder shares what are some of the requirements that NGOs will need to be aware of in order to comply with best practices.
So those who are receiving material contributions, cross-border transactions, those are who I deem more susceptible to money laundering, will have to do effectively know your client, or KYC due diligence on those who are donating them money. So if they receive a substantial donation, they're going to have to know who that person is. They're going to have to know the due diligence on that person. Very similar to what the banking institutions are doing. They have to comply with that, because ultimately the goal is to identify where the money is coming from and who the money is coming from. And by and large, our not-for-profits in the Bahamas are really a low-risk category. But we just have to demonstrate to the authorities that we are approaching it in a compliant and a proper way in the regulation of those.
The AG notes that the government thinks this legislation is appropriate as it relates to NGOs. And some good news for Bahamian light manufacturers. New opportunities will soon become available to this group to have their goods accessed in the U.S. market. This matter was recently discussed when the ambassador of the Bahamas to the United States, Wendell Jones, met with U.S. Industry and Government Relations Director of Registrar Corporation, Ms. Coley Anderson, to discuss various procedures to assist manufacturers. Registrar Corporation is a company that provides FDA compliance assistance to businesses of all sizes that want to export products to the U.S. During the meeting held on Wednesday, March 23rd, the government's priority in export diversification and commitment to assisting Bahamian businesses expand to the United States were discussed. It was agreed that various forums could be organized to better acquaint interested Bahamian entities in the modalities to access the U.S. market. The Registrar Corporation Company areas of specialty include food and beverages, medical devices, cosmetics, pharmaceutical drugs, and other FDA-related products. Stay with us, our final story is up next.